Hey all, welcome to Eric Wright's Games Guide to Gwent. This guide will cover the basic rules, general strategy, and faction-specific strengths of the beloved card game introduced in The Witcher 3. To be clear, this guide is specific to The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt and does not cover the CD Projekt standalone title Gwent, The Witcher card game. In The Witcher 3, Geralt first plays Gwent with a scholar at the bar in Woesong Bridge. His playable deck is the Northern Realms faction and comes pre-equipped with the necessary number of cards. Before diving into the deck, let's first cover Gwent's objective and basic rules. The objective of Gwent is to score the most points in 2 out of a possible 3 rounds. Gwent decks contain unit cards and special cards. A minimum of 22 unit cards are required to play a game, and from 0 to 10 special cards can be added. Thus, the minimum deck size is 22. Unit cards will have a number in the top left corner denoting their power. This power is added to a player's point total, and a round's winner is determined by who has attained the highest number of points. Unit cards are also separated into siege, ranged, and melee categories, as indicated by a sword, bow, or catapult icon in the middle left. This determines where they will be placed on the Gwent battlefield. Special cards, while not having a power, create effects that influence the point total. We'll cover the types of special cards and their effects a little later. A hand of 10 cards is randomly drawn from the deck, and players are allowed to redraw 2 cards one at a time. Once the hands are finalized, a coin is flipped to see which player plays first. Upon deciding the order, players alternate playing 1 card until a player passes the turn where all possible cards have been played. At the end of a round, all played cards go into their owner's discard pile. Remember that a total of 2 rounds must be won, and thus players should ensure they have sufficient cards for future rounds when considering whether to pass the round or keep playing. Unsurprisingly, it is advantageous when unit cards have a higher strength, and there are many opponents that will have an advantage early on for this very reason. Gwent is much more complicated than simply having higher value unit cards. A number of special cards and synergies can help an underpowered deck win. Special cards affect all non-heroic unit cards on the battlefield and include 1. Weather cards. There are 4 weather cards that Geralt comes pre-equipped with. Weather cards reduce the power to 1 for all units in the corresponding siege, ranged, and melee sections, and can be a powerful tool to limit an enemy's point total. However, these cards, in my opinion, aren't very good. This is because A. They limit the power of friendly unit cards in that same section. B. Opponents might not play cards in the same section as your weather card. And C. A 4th clear weather card removes all prior weather effects. Of all the weather cards, I would recommend only carrying a clear weather, as this card has the power to undo the effect of multiple weather cards, and as a result can have a 2-for-1 impact. 2. Commander's Horns. These cards double the power of either the siege, ranged, or melee sections. I think it is almost always good to have 1 to 2 of these cards in your deck, because as long as you have at least 1 other unit card in your hand, the horn is worth the same value. And if you have more than 1 unit card in the same section, then the horn is more valuable. Be careful not to have too many horns, as you need enough non-heroic unit cards to make them worth it. 3. Scorches. This card destroys the highest power card on the battlefield and all cards with that same total. This effect can be devastating when destroying multiple high power cards. However, it isn't always reliable, as A. You may have the highest non-heroic unit card. B. Sometimes one high point card shields a larger number of weaker cards. And C. Cards can sometimes be resurrected after Scorch, meaning the effect isn't always permanent. I generally keep 1 Scorch in my deck and try and be patient with it so that it destroys at least 2 enemy cards at once. Number 4. Decoys. The final category of special card replaces a card on the player's board with the decoy, returning the replaced card to its owner's hand. Decoys can be used in the following situations. A. The opponent passes the turn while you're winning, and you can return a card to your hand for the next round. B. Retrieving a card from a weather effect that is limiting its power. C. Replaying cards that have effects when entering the battlefield. For example, medic cards that allow you to return a card from your discard pile. Or D. Commandeering an enemy spy card. Spy cards are placed on an opponent's side in exchange for drawing 2 cards. Decoys allow you to retrieve and use these powerful cards against your opponent. For factions with many spy cards, I typically keep 2 to 3 decoys in my deck and scale down for factions with fewer. As you might have noticed, unit cards can be more than just a static point total. Many unit cards come with supplementary effects or abilities. These added attributes are usually indicated by icons on the left and include: Number 1. Heroic cards. Heroic cards are unique in that A. Their strength is typically high, and B. They are completely immune from all special effects. Note that while this is a good thing when resisting enemy weather and scorch effects, it also applies to friendly buffs such as those gained from a commander's horn or a medic card. Heroic cards cannot be affected by any other cards and thus cannot be retrieved from a discard pile. Heroic cards have a golden sun around their strength with a black background and white text. Number 2. Spy cards. These cards are perhaps the strongest in the game. This is because they exchange giving enemies strength for drawing 2 cards. In almost every case, a spy card's power will be less than the combined power of 2 additional cards. This becomes especially true as players improve their decks. For instance, a starting deck might have an average card power of 4, while a fully unlocked deck with good synergies might be closer to 15. Thus, the relative power of a spy card for the beginner deck is 8, while its power for the advanced deck is 30. They are most prominently featured in the Northern Realms and Nilfgaardian Empire factions and have an eye icon. Number 3. Muster. Cards with the muster effect summon any card from a hand or deck that shares their name. This effect is particularly common in the Monsters faction, and some muster cards have up to 4 additional cards they can summon. Muster cards have a dual helmet icon. Number 4. Agile. This ability is perhaps the worst and simply allows players to play a unit card in one of 2 sections. This card is most often seen in the Scoia'tael faction, with melee or ranged being the options. This ability is best used to take advantage of having all cards in the same row where a commander's horn is present, or to avoid a weather condition in the alternate section. Agile cards have 2 curved arrows and show both sections where the card can be placed. Number 5. Medic. Medic cards allow players to return a non-heroic unit card from their discard pile to the battlefield. They are powerful and can pair with decoys to cycle their effect multiple times. Medic cards have a black heart with a white cross icon. Number 6. Tight Bond. Cards with Tight Bond double their power for each card next to them with the same name. These cards have very high point potential, and it is important to get all the copies of the higher strength versions in your deck. Typically, there are between 2 and 4 copies of these cards, capping their power. Note that Tight Bond cards can be susceptible to Scorch type effects and shouldn't be played quickly. Their icon is 2 hands shaking. Number 7. Morale Boost. Cards with Morale Boost give all other non-heroic cards in the same section 1 additional strength, excluding themselves. This is another modest effect, most commonly seen in the Scoia'tael faction. Cards with Morale Boost have a large cross icon. Number 8. Cards with special effects. There are a limited number of cards that, in addition to their strength, have a limited special card effect. An example of this is Dandelion, who doubles the strength of all other cards in his melee row like a commander's horn, in addition to providing 2 strength points of his own. The drawback is that Dandelion cannot be placed in ranged or siege sections like a commander's horn. Another example of this is Velentretenmirth that has a built-in Scorch effect in addition to its 7 strength. The Scorch, however, is limited to only melee enemy units and only triggers if the enemy has at least 10 strength in the melee row. However, as melee is the most common section, and powerful decks nearly always output at least 10 points per section, Velentretenmirth is very powerful, especially since your cards are immune to its Scorch effect. A final type of card to cover are leaders. The Northern Realms are led by King Foltest, Nilfgaard by Emperor Emir, the Scoia'tael by the Elven Queen Francesca, and the Monsters by Eredin, King of the Wild Hunt. These leaders all have a special ability they can activate once per game. To add to the complexity, there are 5 unique versions of each leader card. Most of these versions are locked at the start of the game, but it is important to read an opponent's leader card ability at the start of each battle. Examples of abilities include playing a specific weather card from a deck, drawing an extra card to start the game, looking at 3 random cards in your opponent's hand, and much more. Some of these abilities take up a turn and thus can be used to stall when you'd rather not play your next card. In addition to the leader's ability, the 4 factions have a default perk as follows. The North: draw an extra card when winning a round of Gwent. Nilfgaard: win all tied matches. Scoia'tael: decide who goes first at the start of the round. Monsters: a randomly chosen card stays on the battlefield after each round. Now that you know about all the cards, it's time to cover general strategy. While some strategies are deck and faction specific, others are broadly applicable. Examples include: 1. Playing last is a huge advantage. When an opponent passes, you can plan how to win the round in the most efficient way possible. The best way to accomplish this is by including spy cards in your deck that let you draw extra cards, but other ways include strategically passing a hand if an opponent has played more cards, or picking leaders and factions that let you draw an extra card. 2. Protect your vulnerable cards. Your highest scoring non-heroic cards should remain in your hand for as long as possible. There are no cards in Gwent that force you to discard or otherwise affect cards that remain in your hand. 3. Have a theme and strategy. Examples of this include: A. Decks with a lot of medic cards should ensure they have enough non-heroic high-power cards for the medics to retrieve. B. Decks should typically try and focus their units into 1 or 2 board sections. This will ensure the commander's horns will have a greater impact and can allow them to carry a weather card for the section they avoid. C. Decks that use lots of spies should have more decoys in case enemies try to use their spies against them. 4. Don't be afraid to pass. While passing is something you want to avoid in closely contested battles, if you're down big early, it may be the best choice. A similar approach when an opponent starts well is to play your very worst cards in the hopes that they keep playing their good cards. If you can trade your 3 worst cards for 4 of their better ones, you may be in a great position to pass and win the next 2 rounds. Passing can be especially effective if you've managed to gain a card advantage. My rule of thumb is that losing a round is worth roughly 2 cards. So if you've managed to muster a 3-card advantage and are down a significant number of points, it is likely a good time to pass the turn. Number 5. Don't be in a rush. If an opponent plays a weather card that impacts your troops, and you have a clear weather card, hold on to it for as long as you can. The last thing you want is to clear the weather only to find out they had a second copy. Similarly, when winning, save abilities and unit cards for later rounds, even if playing them would yield a lot of points. Number 6. Streamline your deck. Only ever include the minimum number of unit cards unless you find yourself regularly drawing your entire deck. Every mediocre card you exclude increases the chances you'll draw your best cards. Number 7. Limit counterplay. Try and start the hand by using heroic cards, spy cards, or applicable leader abilities. This will allow you to gain a card advantage and limit an opponent's ability for counterplay. Avoid playing high-strength non-heroic cards with the same power to protect yourself from big scorch effects. Number 8. Calculate your card's expected values. When planning cards to include in your deck, try and estimate the expected point value. Sometimes players will include a card with one power that has a morale boost ability without realizing that on average the morale boost effect will only gain between 2 and 4 points. For this reason, a generic 5-point card is likely better. Similarly, low-point tight bond cards with only 2 copies will typically generate fewer points than generic cards with higher strength. Having covered general strategy, I'll now provide my faction-specific recommendations after unlocking most of the cards. The Northern Realms. Main focus: draw cards with spy cards, score big points with tight bond combos combined with Commander's Horns. The Northern Realms get access to 4 spy cards, making them tied with Nilfgaard for the most. They also have 3 groups of worthwhile tight bond cards, including Catapults, 8 strength times 2 copies, Crinfrid Reavers, 5 strength times 3 copies, and Blue Stripe Commandos, 4 strength times 3 copies. Use spy cards to get multiple copies of the tight bond pairings and top it off with a Commander's Horn to seal the deal. Try to outlast your opponents and only play the tight bond pairings after they've passed. This helps prevent the tight bond combos from being scorched. Lastly, include at least 2 decoys to counteract enemy spy cards. These decoys can also be used to replay the Dun Banner Medic or Velen Trettenmirth for added melee scorch effects. Remember that the Northern Realms draw an extra card when winning the round, and thus can be played more aggressively in round 1. For the leader, I chose the Foltest, who instantly clears weather effects. This is accessible early and is quite powerful. It is superior to other weather abilities because A, it is the best weather ability, and B, Foltest doesn't require you to draw the card from your deck. He simply clears the weather himself, and thus allows for a more streamlined build. Nilfgaardian Empire. Main focus: draw cards, resurrect cards from previous rounds. Like the Northern Realms, the Nilfgaardian faction gets access to 4 total spy cards. While these spy cards have higher strength, and thus give more points to enemies, as decks get stronger, this becomes unimportant. In addition to having powerful draw, the Nilfgaardians also have 5 medics that can help resurrect enemy spy cards, and 3 non-heroic cards with 10 strength. The medics can also pair nicely with Velen Trettenmirth. Due to the abundance of medics, the deck can use fewer decoys than the North. Try and ensure you play enough cards in a given round to fully utilize the medic cards in future rounds. You may want to include a clear weather card as well. For the leader, I recommend the Emir that lets you return a card from an enemy's discard pile to your hand. I think this leader ability is perhaps the best in the game, as it allows you to steal away spy cards you played in previous rounds and replay them. Also remember that Nilfgaard wins all ties, so feel free to match your opponent's score after they pass for optimal efficiency. Monsters. Main focus: overwhelm the enemy with muster effects. Compound them with Commander's Horn. Monsters are a unique, fun, and fast-paced alternative to the 2 previous factions. They rely heavily on redrawing cards to start the match, as you ideally only want 1 of any given card in your 3 muster clusters as part of your opening hand. These clusters include A. Vampires, of which there are 4 cards with 4 strength and 1 card with 5 strength. Arrakis, of which there are 3 cards with 4 strength and 1 card with 6 strength. crones, of which there are 3 cards with 6 strength. Pair these clusters with Dandelion, Commander's Horns, heroic cards, and perhaps a couple clear weathers. While the monsters faction can swiftly stamp out weak decks, it does have vulnerabilities. First, all of the muster units are melee. This makes them very susceptible to the frost weather effect that reduces all melee unit strength to 1. For this reason, you will want to carry 1 to 2 copies of clear weather in this deck. This deck is also susceptible to Scorch due to the large number of unit cards it puts on the battlefield. This is particularly true of the crones, who all have 6 strength when mustered. The other weakness of this deck is that there are no medics and only 1 spy card. This means you can get outdrawn and run out of gas, especially against skilled opponents. To avoid this, try and pair your muster combos with either Dandelion or Commander's Horn to try and outscore your opponent even when they draw extra cards. Lastly, try and save at least one of your primary muster combos for a future round. For the leader card, I chose the Eredin that restores a card from your discard pile to your hand. Use this on enemy spies from previous rounds or villain Trettenmirth. You could alternatively choose the Eredin who doubles the strength of all melee units due to this deck's melee muster synergy. Scoia'tael. Main focus? I'm not sure. Maybe try and stack most of your points in range damage section and use weather on melee and ranged? The Scoia'tael deck seems by far the worst to me. I'm not sure if I'm missing something, but I honestly don't see how it can compete with the other factions. The unique agile ability that many unit cards have to be placed in either ranged or melee rows isn't that good. Its other themes are all over the place. It has access to 3 medics, but they have 0 power. It has 1 muster group of 5 power times 3, making it worse than the 3 primary monster clusters, and it has a couple of strong cards with morale boost, which is probably the second worst ability after agile. The worst feature is that, like the monsters faction, it has only 1 spy card. Unlike monsters, it doesn't have good abilities to offset this lack of draw. My best advice might be to use Frost and Rain cards to limit enemy siege and melee power, while leveraging the Agile feature to stack the ranged row with Morale Boost and Commander's Horn. For the leader card, I chose the Francesca that draws an extra card at the start of battle. This, combined with the faction ability that makes opponents go first, may somewhat offset the card advantage they'll get from spies. Not really, but hopefully. With the faction-specific strategies concluded, I thought it would be fun to end by showing some of the game's best and most interesting cards. I've included a list of my top 10 ranked in order. Number 1. Mysterious Elf. This is a spy card with 0 power, meaning you draw 2 cards with 0 benefit to your opponent. However, the best feature of this card is that it is heroic, meaning enemies cannot use decoys or medics to retrieve the card and use it against you. Number 2. Menno Cohorn. This is a heroic medic card with 10 strength. The total strength, heroic nature, and medic ability are a formidable combination. Number 3. Villain Trettenmirth. This golden dragon combines a respectable 7 strength with a Scorch ability that destroys an enemy's strongest non-heroic melee unit so long as they have 10 total points. Because melee is by far the most common type of card, and more advanced decks almost always have 10 points in their melee section, this card is almost always useful. It is also a good card to combo with medics and decoys. Number 4. Vampire Catechin. This is one of 5 vampires with muster in the monster set. It has 5 strength compared to 4 strength of its kin, meaning it effectively shields the other 4 from Scorch-like effects. Number 5. Yennefer of Vengerberg. Similar to Cohorn, Yennefer is a heroic medic but has 7 strength instead of 10. Number 6. Catapults and Crinfrid Reavers. I couldn't decide whether the 5 strength times 3 raiders or the 8 strength times 2 catapults were the best type bond cards. In terms of total impact, the raiders win, as having all 3 on the board gives you 3 cards each with a power of 15. Consider that this strength can then be doubled by a Commander's Horn, and you have some of the highest per card point totals in the game. On the other hand, the catapults give you a total of 2 cards with power 16, but are easier to combo as they only require 2 versus 3 cards. They are also better in instances where only 1 copy of the card is drawn. Number 7. Geralt and Ciri. I'm combining Geralt and Ciri into one as they are effectively the same card. A heroic card with the highest single card power of 15. While not particularly fancy, these cards put pressure on opponents with 0 risk and make them great cards to play at the start of hands. Number 8. Shirou. This elven card is similar to Velentretenmirth, except it has 8 power and has the conditional scorch effect on enemy siege sections. Despite having 1 more power than Velentretenmirth, I see this card as worse because siege units are less common and because Scoia'tael have very few siege cards that can synergize with Shirou. Number 9. Karin. A heroic monster card with power of 8 that has both agile abilities and morale boost. While not the highest power card with morale boost, Karin has agile and more importantly synergizes far better with the muster mechanics of the monster deck. For example, a monster deck might muster 8 melee units in a single round, making the relative value of the morale boost 8. Compare this to a Scoia'tael deck that will likely only have 3 to 4 unit cards, and the Karin's lower strength is offset by its incremental morale boost value. Number 10. Taylor. Taylor has the second lowest point total of all spies at 1, and thus is the second best spy card in the game. Note that he is not heroic and thus can be used against you, making him considerably worse than the mysterious elf. That wraps up my beginner's guide to Gwent. I hope it was both helpful and enjoyable. If you did find this guide useful, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to help support me making more content like this in the future. Thanks, and I hope to see you all again soon.